Well, good morning, folks. Welcome back to Three's In. Bobo sitting here. So a couple weeks ago, I received an email from a viewer asking me about my thoughts on students who continually insisted on whining about grades. Oh, mine. I wanted this one. So I thought about it a couple days and then answered him. And then I've thought about it a little bit more and decided, hey, thanks for the material. Something interesting to talk about. Okay, to begin with, he mentioned a word I hadn't heard for a while, quibbling. And I was first introduced to that word from my dad when he was going through a list of Beanos when I turned 5 or 6. There'll be no this, there'll be no that, there'll be no this. I got it. And quibbling was one of them. There will be no quibbling in this household when I tell you to do something. Got it? Oh, you bet I got it. Okay, that being said, I knew all about quibbling, not so much about whining. I didn't get into that very much, but anyway. Kind of put it in the back of my head until I got to ROTC in 1967. Actually, I got there in 64, but in 1967 we went off to summer camp. And I was fascinated as I was reading through their list of Beanos to find a paragraph on quibbling. So I'll just share it with you here a moment. Quibbling is a violation of the Cadet Honor Code. Questions? Should be fairly clear. Quibbling means haggling over details. For example, a cadet is reported for being at the base exchange at 10:30 hours, 23 June 1967. He submits an explanation of report stating that the report is believed to be incorrect and that he was not at the base exchange at 10:30 hours, 23 June 1967. Later investigation proved he left the base exchange at 10:20 hours, 23 June 1967. Therefore, in his letter of explanation, he quibbled since he attempted to deceive the Commandant of Cadets into believing that he was not at the base exchange at all, while in reality he quibbled over 10 minutes. Okay, you get the idea. So I held to that, and I was pretty hard over as an IP, a flight commander, and so forth, about not tolerating quibbling or whining. I just wasn't going to do it. I didn't have time for it, and it's unbecoming of an officer, and certainly unbecoming of an aviator. So that being said, a couple of personal experiences I had with quibbling or whining of my own were, the first one was a kid named, never mind what his name was. Anyway, he came back from a check ride. Now this kid was in the beginning of being a legend in his own mind. He was a good student. He was a good student pilot, and so he comes back from his contact check, and he's a little bit pissed off about a grade or a couple grades he'd been given by the check pilot. So he walks over to his desk, and he was one of the first ones to have taken his check right. So he slams the grade book down and commands an audience. So all his homies are gathered around him, and he's going on about how this check pilot was really nitpicking him and so forth. Of course, all the other guys are sitting there hanging on his every word, and I let him go for a little bit, and then I walked over and said, "What's up?" And he told me how this check pilot had been unfair to him in this area and that area and this area. So I said to him, well, listen, let me take a moment here, maybe provide a teachable moment. I said, we're all officers here now, right? Yeah. I said, okay. The big difference here is we're not we are students, if you will, per se, but we're officers. It's not like ROTC or the academy or this, that, or the other. You got it? Yeah. I said, okay. In the officer corps, if we have a conflict with somebody, we don't go back and carp about it behind his back. If we think the issue we have has merit, walk down, politely report in, and explain your concerns. That shouldn't be any issue at all. No, I guess not. So he grabbed his grade book and his grade sheet, and down the hall he went. About 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, what it was, he comes back to the flight room and very quiet. Comes back to the flight room, walks over to the desk, puts his grade book back in the shelf or wherever it went, takes his grade sheet, turns it in, didn't say another word. And so I walked up to him and I said, how'd that work out? And he says, not very well, sir. And I said, why? He said, well, he didn't care for my critique of his grading practices. And he said, I think if he could have, he would have shoved that grade sheet up my ass. But God bless him, he didn't. Not God bless him, but anyway, he didn't. The point is, I made my point there about quibbling over grading practices or whining about them to the whole class. I didn't have to stand up and give a formal presentation. It worked like a champ. The second incident I had was on a Friday afternoon at 4:30. We'd come down from a four-ship. Four-ship went very well. It went fine. I can't tell you anything more about it than this experience I'm going to share with you. During the grading exercise, I gave Paul a good on this one on turning rejoins. Didn't think much about it. He did turning rejoins. I've seen thousands of turning rejoins. It was good. It was fine. Okay. So anyway, finished up, sent him on his way. Like I said, it's coming up 4:30, 4:45, and I'm closing up my part of the shop there in the flight commander's office, reviewing the day's missions and how they went and so forth. Paul sticks his head in the door and says, sir, he says, do you have a moment I could talk with you? And I said, absolutely, come on in. He comes in, he has a grade sheet with him. He says, on the grading, he says, you gave me a good on turning rejoins, and he says, up until now, I've had nothing but excellence. And he said, I'm coming up for a fighter assignment, and if the board sees that good, they might think it's regression, and I might be at risk for getting a fighter. Give me a break. One turning rejoin, and you get it good. They're not going to give it a second thought. Matter of fact, they're probably not going to even look at that grade sheet. Anyway. So I said, well, you raised an interesting point there, Paul. I said, let me see the grade sheet. So I took it, and he erased it, and he's standing there watching me. And we had those bubble sheets in those days. We used number 2 pencils. And so I take it and fill the grade in, only instead of marking it up to an excellent, I marked it down to a fair. Pissed me off. Handed it back to him, and I said, I gave you a grade based on what I saw and how I felt. It didn't lend much more thinking into it. I said, didn't set me on fire one way or the other. But I said, here's the deal. If you come back in here questioning my grading practices again, I said, I'm going to change that grade again, and you're not going to like it, and either am I. You're not going to like it because it's not going to go up. And I'm not going to like it because it's going to take a couple minutes for me to sit and make a write-up about it, which you know I can. Questions? No, sir. So he does a 180 and out the door he goes. I finish up my work and off I go. One of us is happy. So that being said, I used to make it a point with the new IPs, and occasionally I'd reinforce my other instructors in the flight, that we will not tolerate arguing with over grades. Just not going to do it. And I made it very clear that my flight policy was, if I walk in the flight room and I hear you arguing with a student over a grade, one way or the other, I'm going to ask you to come into the office, and I'm going to take you off the flying schedule. It's not personal. It's just one of these things I'm not going to tolerate. And you won't fly for the rest of the day. Student, I don't care what he does. But you won't be flying because you know better. You need to put this, the first time you see it raise its ugly head, you need to hammer it right then and there. If you don't, we're going to end up with guys like Adam Kissinger graduating from pilot training. And we've all seen how he turned out. Matter of fact, I'd love to track down his IP and have it come to Jesus with that dummy. Anyway, so that kind of was my philosophy on Quibblers and Whiners. Now, I'm in a chat group with 4 other former instructor pilots and from another era. Great guys, all these guys are. They were all IPs and tweets, and then and then in a T6 program. And so I just raised the issue with them. And one of them told me about a student he had. And I am so glad I didn't know this when I was instructing myself, because I could just see myself waiting for an opportunity to use it. But anyway, what had happened is he called me and we were talking, and during the conversation he told me about a whiner he was dealing with. And we'd talk about it and laugh about it. And he would continue to tell this kid, now, you need to knock this whining crap off. It's not becoming. Well, anyway, this one day I called, or he called me, I don't know, and I said, how's it going with the whiner? He says, well, he was able to finally sort himself out. And I said, how's that? He says, well, we came down off a flight, and on the way in, he was whining about something or another. And when we got into the flight room, now, I need to take a moment here. This guy is about 6'2" or 6'11", he's way up there. And he's a lieutenant colonel, or he was, and he was just serving out his time before he got out of the Air Force. He was a reserve officer, and so he had no additional duties. His only duties were to fly a couple times a day. God, throw me into that briar patch. So he comes into the flight room. Now you get the picture. He's a lieutenant colonel. He's standing in a room full of captain students or captain IPs and second lieutenant students. So his kid goes over, sits down at the desk, and when he sits down, he stands there and he looks at the kid and he says, okay, he says, I think it's time we take a time out here. Now he's got a little bit of a booming voice when he chooses. So everybody in the room goes silent. Everybody just, ooh. And they can tell he's not amused by this kid. So he says, I think it's time that you take some time off. Matter of fact, you're off the flying schedule. You take some time off, head back to your BOQ room. He says, find a comfortable chair and settle in, and then sit there and figure out a way to unscrew yourself. Only he dropped the F-bomb on him. So he says, and when you can come back in totally unscrewed, he says, we can pick up the program where we left off and continue on to where you can graduate. But until then, he says, I can't do anything with you. So he says, just go ahead and put your grade book on the shelf. I'll take care of it. Grab your hat and your keys and find a comfortable chair and start doing some meditating or whatever you do. But he says, you're not going to fly until you get yourself sorted out. Unscrew yourself. God, I love it. Anyway, like I said, I'm glad I didn't know about it when I was instructing. No doubt in my little military mind, I would have had to employ that. The next one I have that I heard about was from one of these guys. He said he had a standard brief at the beginning of every new class. Now that's where you put an end to this, right at that beginning. And if it gets out of hand, then you have to kind of call a timeout and reset everything. But the best time to deal with whiners is right from day one. And what he said was, he would tell the students, I don't care why you made the mistake. Doesn't bother me at all. He said, it's not our job to help you make, it's our, I screwed that up, let me erase that, okay, that's what that was. He says, it's our job to help you not make the same mistake again. So we'll tell you all the ways to do it correctly. So just sit back and take the feedback. That's all there is to it. And I didn't specifically express that in that manner. I certainly practiced it. I was always okay with the kid making a mistake, and then I could debrief from that mistake. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. My job's to sit here and let you make them and learn from them. And then he had the third point. I will never remember you as the guy that screwed up that one pattern. But all of us in the flight will remember you for being a quibbling little bitch, if you will. And boy, that is so true. The IPs that work for me, that I worked with when I was an IP, we all talk about the Whiners. And certainly we talk about some of the guys that went on and did very well for themselves. But boy, those Whiners would stand out. So if you're an instructor today, hopefully you don't have to deal with this. Hopefully you addressed it before it ever came up. But if you have any questions about it, do not tolerate it. I don't, whatever technique you choose, talk to the old heads around the squadron, I guess. But whatever technique you choose, you have to put it into it, because if these people get away with it at the desk, at your briefing desk, they will certainly attempt to try it in the airplane while airborne. And that is no place to have a whiner or a quibbler on board. A little bit more serious than I typically am, but I feel very strongly about this. So with that, good luck, and I feel sorry for your quibblers. Get them. That is Bobo Base Gear Stop.